Welcome, everyone. Great to be with you here. Maybe we'll just do quick introductions first. My name is Cody Powers. I'm with Steve Herbert from Indivior. I'm representing ZS. ZS, we're a consulting firm that works largely with pharmaceutical and biotech companies, other industries as well, but that's the majority of what we do. Today's topic, before I turn it over to Steve, is about business development in the psychedelic space. So, what motivates companies to want to be in the space? What are things that companies are both excited by? What are they concerned about? And what are some of the options that they're considering here? I'll turn it over to Steve just to do a quick introduction with him too first.
Sure. So my name is Steve Aber. I head up corporate development for Indivior. Indivior is a very niche specialty pharmaceutical company that is really focused on addiction. Our marketed products are Suboxone and Sublocade, and we also have a long-acting risperidone for schizophrenia. We have several projects in the pipeline for alcohol use disorder and for cannabis use disorder. And we have a lot of experience in scheduled drug products and bringing these products to market. We are increasingly interested in the potential of psychedelics, and particularly for our patients. And so we're delighted to be with you here today and share some of our thoughts on investing in this space.
So maybe just to start off, I was wondering if we could explore a little bit of why companies are interested in this space. Based on both speaking for Indivior and maybe for the industry at large. What do you think some of the driving motivations are for interest in psychedelics, at least among pharma and biotech companies?
Yeah, so the momentum is really starting to happen now, and I'll say, when I look at the broader industry of pharmaceuticals, I don't think big pharma's totally caught on yet. So there's going to be an evolution here, and this is going to happen as it goes. But really, what's exciting us, is the data, is the clinical data, and the opportunity to really transform the lives of our patients. So, from that standpoint, we think there's tremendous potential in psychedelics, and that's really the biggest driver of it all.
If you look at not just yourselves, but other companies and what they've said publicly about psychedelics, where do you feel like people are right now, at least within pharma and biotech organizations? Are they at full embrace? Is it tepid? Where do you think companies are right now if you had to take their temperature?
Yeah, I think we're very much in the early innings. When we think about pharmaceuticals and commercialization of psychedelics, this is even though there's been research going back to the 30s and 40s and stuff. The whole dark period that happened with psychedelics, really this new period of evolution in psychedelics is now starting to generate that data that excites pharmaceuticals, but we're in the early innings here. And I think, even within our own company, and as we experience, there's a learning curve, right? And I think a lot of folks come at this with some preconceived notions about what psychedelics are. And we have to get over those hurdles to begin with, and then to have the conversation really around this is the benefit to the patient. And this is the value driver that really matters at the end of the day. So I think I would say it's in the early stages now. I would say that Indivior, we've been looking at this now for a better part of a year. So we're even a little late relative to some of you folks, but we think we're pretty far ahead of the curve in terms of the rest of the pharmaceutical business, aside for a few other companies like Otsuka or some others who have made investments in the space. So a lot. This will happen. The more that companies innovate and develop drugs in this space and generate that clinical data, this big pharma will pick up, and then it will happen quite rapidly then.
So you mentioned preconceived notions within biotech and pharma companies. I was wondering if you could kind of talk, maybe for the audience here who's trying to understand what happens inside of a biotech or pharma company, the types of conversations that are happening around psychedelics. What are some of those notions that either you're trying to dispel or things that people are anchored to that may prevent them from wanting to fully embrace the space?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's multifaceted. I mean, it really starts with just an association with street drugs and and liability there, and so we have to educate and we have to get over some of those barriers there. I think that's a big part of the misconception around this and the misunderstanding. I think. People worry about reputational harm and things like that when they're in this industry, and they want to see, hey, look, next year is going to be a big catalyst for this industry with the potential approval of the MAPS product and Compass shortly there behind. So once you have validation by the FDA, and I mean, look, I'll say, Spravato and J&J have already sort of led the way there a little bit, but this is, those approvals will catalyze a lot of that discussion also, and I think, the more pharma-like we can actually generate, in integrating psychedelics into the actual healthcare system. I mean, if we want to reach the most patients, this is the way to do it. Having insurance pay for this, having clinicians deliver the service in a regulated manner, having cooperation with the DEA on the scheduling, the distribution system. I mean, operating within the framework of that is going to reach the most patients. So we think it's the right opportunity for us to start really getting involved in this.
So you mentioned a couple of things there that for folks in this room may seem more intuitive, more natural if you're in the space every day. I'm wondering if you could kind of compare psychedelics maybe to any new type of drug technology X. What is unique about psychedelics in your mind that makes it perhaps different than other classes of drugs?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll speak to our products first of all. I mean, Sublocade and Suboxone, they really do a lot of good for patients. I mean, they address a lot of the cravings, the withdrawals, issues that folks have in opioid use disorder. But there's a high degree of dropout over a period of time, and it doesn't address the underlying behavioral and thinking issues that ultimately need to be addressed with addiction. So. Psychedelics, with what we're seeing in some of the data, and combined with very good psychotherapy to be able to change our minds and to get on that progression to absolute, and that's what we would call a lasting recovery. If we can start to change those behaviors and get onto a different thinking, so psychedelics have that potential. We have it, when you look at the broader class of just small molecules, as particularly within addiction, and I would say it extends into mental health too. And to a large extent, you're really addressing symptomology. So this is a really exciting area of emerging medicine that we absolutely want to be a part of.
If you had to think about you as a company, not just for your own internal development purposes, but even looking out for business development purposes, trying to form new partnerships for M&A, et cetera, what are the kinds of things that you as a company tend to prioritize or think are important for any new psychedelic opportunity?
Yeah, so I think, and I'll go back to what I was saying before about, the most attractive investments are going to be the ones that are most pharma-like, that can actually fit in that healthcare system. So we're looking for, when we do an evaluation, number one, it has to be on strategy. It has to fit what we're doing with the company. I mean, we were looking at growth opportunities across substance use disorder where we have a real competitive advantage. So we don't look at some of the other areas, that may not be in our wheelhouse. That said, so then you go from your strategy into what is the data? Is the data, because ultimately at the end of the day, this is the value proposition for patients. If you can demonstrate that there is a real effect size on these patients, that you're really driving some efficacy there, and it's durable. I mean, you also want to see the long-term durability of this, that it's really having that impact over time. So I think the data, then intellectual property. I think we really need to discuss that as well in this forum. It's drug development is not an inexpensive endeavor, and we really need to get the payback when we invest this significant amount of capital into these programs. And so intellectual property is a very important part of this, and it needs to be top of mind for all of this because you're really making an investment. You've got to be able to get that return. So going down, and then I think when we think about opportunities in our business, we're also thinking about scalability, and operationalizing it. So how do we, like for instance, if you take some of these, you have a tremendous amount of psychotherapy associated with drug. What is the treatment guideline around that? Do we have enough counselors to bring to bear? What are we going to need to do to train those counselors and bring them up to speed to be able to deliver those services and maintain quality, consistency, and really the standard of care across that, so everyone's getting really what's best in class. And we think when I say scalability too, can we bring other technologies to bear for that as well? I mean, digital solutions or virtual reality or some of these things to help sort of ease the burden on counselors. And I know I'm speaking specifically in that context because I know that some psychedelics are being developed without counseling, but for us within substance use disorder, we think it's an essential element. So,
let's talk a little bit about the first thing you mentioned there, data. What kind of data are you typically looking for? What counts? When I say what counts, is it just anecdotal evidence, randomized trials? What kind of data are you typically looking for to validate an opportunity?
Yeah, so I mean, anecdotal evidence is nice to have, as a starting point. But ultimately, we have to do random, controlled clinical studies. I mean, this is, and the reason for that is because to go down a regulated pathway, to ultimately get mainstream in the healthcare system, that data has to be generated. That data will have to be generated not only in the clinic, but there also have to be real-world evidence that helps support how this operates once you get out of the clinic, and then over time. As I mentioned, durability. I mean, is there data that supports that after a year, after 2 years, you're still in remission? I mean, in those scenarios, if you have 1 year, 2 years of remission without, after you've taken the treatment, that is a real value proposition for that. So, I mean, all of that data has to be generated in a consistent with the standards of clinical studies and the scientific methods.
Let's talk about the second thing you mentioned. You mentioned intellectual property. Obviously, a lot of compounds in development in this space are for compounds that are the same today as they were 50 years ago.
Yeah.
How does intellectual property play into the equation of evaluating potential psychedelic opportunities?
Yeah, so I didn't catch the last part of what you said, but I think what you're saying is that the first generation of psychedelics is really, the ones that were in the wild, and now they're, being purposed for this. So, look, there's formulation intellectual property. There's all kinds of potential ways to create intellectual property around delivery systems, around, even around the risk management systems for delivering these things. I would say on a sort of a scale of the quality of intellectual property, the most powerful intellectual property, though, is going to be a composition of matter patent. And that is going to be when the molecule itself is novel, and that there's novel data to generate around that. Now it's just the strongest intellectual property from a patent estate. That said, there is still tremendous merits in these first generation psychedelics, and if we can get them to patients sooner, and to really get out there and start to validate all of this. I think that's a good result too. But you have to remember, in the context of how pharmaceutical evaluates this, we have to. Any pharmaceutical company that's investing in this is going to have to get their return. So we've got to be able to see that, at the end of the day.
Let's talk about another thing that you mentioned earlier about digital solutions. Yeah. What role do digital solutions play to complement psychedelic drug development?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think. This is such a new area. The jury's still out on which are going to be the best technologies to really bear on this. I think the way that we are thinking about this is that technology can be not to replace counselors. That's not the idea, but to be a force multiplier to help really address the capacity and to make the counseling more effective. So to the extent that things around virtual reality and things can be used, even digital therapeutics on the apps. Really, at the end of the day, though, that being used in combination with a clinician and a counselor is really how we think is going to be the most effective way. But it enables you to scale more effectively. So I think that there's a number of different technologies that could be brought to bear. But I would say off the top of my head, digital therapeutics and virtual reality are probably right at the forefront.
So I guess when you mentioned digital therapeutics, there obviously a huge component is the assisted therapy part of the equation. So how do you think about the value of the service, quote unquote, versus the value of the drug? Obviously, in many cases here, one each needs the other. But to what extent are you ascribing value to each? So if a company here were developing the drug with the assisted therapy, where should they be putting their time and attention?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, within the payer system, the value is going to be determined by the what's being delivered. If it's a standalone or a drug versus a drug with counseling. I mean, if that drug with counseling creates better outcomes, there's a higher value proposition there for payers. Now, there is complications within our healthcare system. Not to get into all the details between a pharmacy benefit and a medical benefit and how those get adjudicated. But when we think about value, there's value in both of those that has to be conveyed to the payers. It breaks out. I think it really depends. I think and how much counseling is brought to bear and how much. What's the protocol for the treatment? Is this so it depends. But I think you have to straddle the line across both of those things.
You mentioned protocols. Protocols and how people are treated. If you look at the development of different psychedelics and many finally reaching for the first time later stage trials, you start to fast forward to which type of person is ultimately going to use this and where will they use it. If you look at what you expect to happen, what kinds of facilities, what kinds of healthcare professionals do you expect will engage with psychedelics that come through a more traditional drug development ladder?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it also depends on the early days versus when this is fully established and embedded in the healthcare system. I think early on, I mean, the ideal places for treatment are in kind of coordinated centers that have a clinician that you can see, and then there can be referral out within the network to counseling, so that there's a coordinated. This is a warm handoff between your clinician, and there's dialogue back between them. Now, I mean, ultimately, could you envision some scenario where this becomes office-based, and then you have referral out to whatever technology that's on top of that? I mean, that is another way ultimately down the road that we could see this evolving. But in the short term, I mean, you really think about the coordinated health systems as being the biggest opportunity to go. And in centers, I mean, when we do these studies, we're going to want to do studies with KOLs in those centers, as a tip of the spear when we launch these products.
One of the major actors that you had mentioned earlier were payers. U.S. system, ex-U.S., someone's got to pay for it.
Yep.
If you thought about expanding beyond like the consumer audience and having it better adopted by payers, what are the things that payers specifically are looking for to reimburse psychedelics?
Yeah, so let me preface this answer by saying, we've done some market research with payers. This is almost not on their radar in terms of yet, kind of where they're thinking about in terms of their overall budgets and things like that. But ultimately, what payers are going to be looking at is the quality of the data and the efficacy and the benefit to the patient offset by cost versus what is the health economic benefit. So am I getting some savings in my healthcare system by doing this? Because at the end of the day, these are bottom line driven organizations. So we have to understand that is going to be the motive there. But that data is essential to generate that. I mean, when we develop new drugs, we have to develop health economics, dossiers to help support that. and additional studies. I mentioned the real-world evidence. I mean, oftentimes payers really want to see that out of the gate. I think gone are the days where you can just do a clinical study and call it, that's done. So we're continually generating new data and helping support this, particularly as you get out from your treatment and you're in your daily life, is this continuing to provide a benefit.
I'm going to switch gears and focus more now on the pure business development function here. Obviously, you're representing that perspective. When you think about approaching any kind of partnership or even takeover as part of psychedelic opportunities, what kinds of types of deals are you keeping in mind? Are you fairly open on what that relationship could look like? Are there certain types of partnerships, alliances, or acquisitions that might be more preferential for you?
Yeah, so I would say in general, I mean, we try to keep an open mind, right? I mean, in the sense that, an innovator may have capabilities and abilities that complement what we do. In those cases, that may take a different deal structure than one where the innovator maybe just develop it to a certain spot, and we're taking a straight license to it, and we're running through development and starting the commercialization. So I think it depends a little bit on the specific opportunity. Now, from Indivior's standpoint, we think we're pretty good at commercialization. I mean, we built, our opioid use disorder franchise and well over $1 billion in sales every year, but in providing tremendous benefit for patients. But, I think overall, I lost my train of thought where I was going with it. I took a gummy before the presentation, and they told me there was something in it, but we'll see what happens.
I guess in terms of the other way around, what companies are coming to you with? What do you think, or what do you see that most companies who are seeking partnership, who are seeking funding, who are seeking some kind of relationship with a larger biotech or pharma company, what is the typical ask that you see?
Yeah, so it depends on the stage, right? I mean, so companies that come in and they're maybe early stage, preclinical or in that range, are looking for typically an investment to get them to the next round, or they may at some point, when you reach a real value inflection point, you get to a proof of concept or something like that. It's a different conversation at that point. They're more looking for how are we going to take this into the late stage development, generate the evidence for payers and other things, and then start the commercialization process. So I think when folks come in and we've got a clinical proof of concept, that's a really ideal time to talk to us. But it's important. I think when we look at the progression, we want to talk to you early too. I mean, so we want to be able to follow these programs. I mean, we're still learning here too, and we want to see how all of this evolves and what are the best options for us. So, and it's also what we may do at the beginning is start with a deal where something that might be more near term, but we've got to have a long-term strategy. So, I mean, we're always looking for mid-stage assets and early-stage assets, and how do we think about our 10-year plan and our 15-year plan. So, I mean, it really depends. Now, what they're coming for and asking for us, I think that's at those later stage deals, they really want us to commercialize, mostly. I mean, some folks still want to have a joint commercialization model or something like that. I mean, which can work if that company, again, has the right capabilities to do it. It's not a preferred route because those types of deals come with all kinds of governance issues and complications. But that says, it really is. It depends on the specific situation.
Are there things that maybe you've heard from even people this week or even in prior conversations with other companies in the psychedelic space that you would advise them not to ask for or not to essentially lead with? What are some stayaways for the audience?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't mind when folks ask for things, but look, as I said, deals that are complicated are usually not the best deals. So, that involve all kinds of things that can go wrong in governance and, dispute resolutions that, go, I mean, to the cleanest agreements the cleanest agreement is buying something. You buy it, you assume all the liabilities and you assume the asset. Next would be a license agreement where you have primary responsibility be in the hands of a company like ours that's been has experience in this, and then there's shades below that where depending on the needs of the partner and what their capabilities are, we may consider joint development. We may consider option deals. We may consider other types of structures. It really depends on the situation. But as far as what not to ask for, really, I mean, let's have a discussion and we can find a solution.
Okay, so no red lines. I think maybe to kind of bring us home here, if you looked out both your own plans as a company, what other people have talked about in the space, what is the wave that you feel is building? What are the things that you expect to be more of interest to biotech and pharma companies coming into view, specifically in the psychedelic space?
Can you say that again? More of interest to
biotech and pharma companies in the coming years?
Oh, as it comes along. I mean, look, I think this is really going to take off. I mean, at some point. I mean, it may be a gradual process, but the more data that is generated, the more and more momentum is going to happen in this space. And it's just going to be a natural progression. I mean, if this data holds, and continues to hold as we go along. So, I think it's going to happen organically, but did I address your question?
Well, put another way, if there are particular types of technology that you hear talked about more or less, what are some of the areas that you hear people talking about more?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think this is also about first generation, second generation. What is the long-term view on psychedelics? I mean, the trip versus the no trip, and how we generate molecules that address the unmet need without having potential issues that are and I think even on that point about trip no trip, that jury's still out on that as well. I mean, how much of that is essential to the whole experience. So, I think there's an evolution here, and the science is ultimately going to rule the day. So, what we're going to see in the future, I can't predict the future, but I feel fairly confident that this is an emerging area of medicine that will be the new frontier in mental health disorders as we go forward. So psychedelics combined with really high quality psychotherapy I think is the key to addressing a lot of these issues. So how that evolves in terms of the technology and stuff, I don't know all the technologies, but we're eager to find out.
Maybe last to wrap us up here, if you had to give one piece of advice to our audience who may be seeking their first pharma partner, who's looking for funding or for financing, what's the one piece of advice you would leave them with, just to close today?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to go back to intellectual property. If it's investors are going to be very focused on that, and I don't just mean pharmaceutical companies, not just strategic partners, but just your funds. Anybody who is investing in this space is going to want to have some protections. We're not going to make those investments without having that. So, I mean, have that be absolutely embedded into your strategy because it's essential. I think that's probably the most important part.
Thank you. Any before we close here, any questions from the audience? Maybe things that we didn't address here today. We're happy to take them live if folks have them.
Do you mean in terms of a competitive positioning? Like, yeah. Yep. Yeah, well, let me tell you something about Indivior. And I used to work at Pfizer. I worked at Wyeth and a number of other pharmaceutical companies. Indivior really, our number one guiding principle is about making sure that all the patient is embedded into all of our decisions. And we don't just pay that lip service. We really care about our patients. I mean, many of the people that work at our company had former substance use disorder issues, and so there's a real concern. We're not afraid of new technologies that come onto the market. In fact, we want to be a part of them. So, I mean, when folks, if you're doing something great and you're helping people along the way, I mean, that's great. We used to say, I mean, we never attacked methadone when we came out with Sublocade or Suboxone film back in the day. It was never an attack on methadone. It was, listen, that's patient clinician choice. It was really about what, helping these individuals in the best way possible. So, now when some of these technologies start to merge and they're happening, now for us to invest, we want to see it ultimately be, as I said, a few times now, to be something that we can get into the healthcare system and operationalize there. So we think, real clinical data, regulatory approval, all of the elements that you need to bring to market in a traditional healthcare system are important. We would invest in that if in the data there. So I don't think that we're at odds, with new technology. We're always constantly looking for new innovations, and we're not, we're not, I guess, afraid of it, is what I would say. I might need you to get the microphone. I'm sorry, my ears are so bad now.
Yeah, it's okay.
Thank you. My question is related to CRO space, because I heard you gave some advice when it comes to investment and the pharma and obviously commercialization. But where would be the ideal partner if you were looking to CRO in such emerging new field, first generation psychedelic?
The ideal partner for someone with a first generation? Oh, CRO. You mean someone develop? I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I don't really do the request for approvals and stuff for our clinical research organizations. That's more run out of our clinical development group. But I think experience. I mean, having a track record of working in this area obviously is something that folks would look for when they're developing products in this space. So yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, getting out the word about who you are and talking to these folks is obviously the kind of the first step. But as you get more experience in developing these things, I think that will speak for itself. I mean, as you go along. I mean, and to develop in this space, we obviously want people who have done this. The more you've done it, the better that you've done it. Will bear weight.
Thanks so much for taking another question. I'm super fascinated about the future of alternative medications in pharma. So from my perspective as a founder of a pharmaceutical alternative drug company, I'm so curious about any loopholes that you're seeing that's done in the space for getting IP. IP is so difficult for cannabis and psychedelics. I'm now learning about protocol IP, salts IP, so everything but the actual product and all of these things around. So I was just curious if you have anything that you're finding that are pretty strong in terms of IP ownership that would help startups like me.
So, I mean, in simplistic terms, I mean, as I said, I mean, obviously, there's no substitute for a composition of matter patent. You know, when you have a molecule that's new and innovative, and you have data around that, and there's a patent on it. That's not always the case, obviously. So, we think about alternatives now. Formulation patents are probably the next layer down. I mean, so. You know, generating, and obviously, you know, with any patents, there has to be some novelty to it. So I mean, you know, to the extent that you can show a benefit or some technological innovation for it, that's patentable technology. Now, from a pharmaceutical standpoint, we're looking for patents that are Orange Book listable. So those typically, again, are composition of matter, their formulation, and method of use. So using, you know, within whatever the indication is. But as you get to market, and you know, there's other types of patents, manufacturing patents, other types of things that you can do around, as I mentioned, the REMS, you know, which is the risk evaluation and management systems. It really just depends on, or the counseling, you know, what is it, or the treatment guidelines, you know, is there something in this that creates something special, something that can actually be patentable and be novel. So. I think that's kind of the hierarchy, though, starting with composition matter down. But you know, I would definitely encourage you to work with patent counsel to really start thinking this, because it really has to be embedded from the beginning, all the way through the development process. I mean, the decisions that we take today are the ones we're going to have to live with, you know, 10 years down the road and things like that. So this we have to have the foresight when we're doing drug development, ultimately, into how this is going to work and when we commercialize it.